Hi folks, thanks for coming back to the studio. We are now on episode 4 of The Missing Few, a very controversial subject, emotive subject, complicated subject, which a lot of people misunderstand or today don't even know about. And I think it's important that we do know about this and we understand the whole thing from all the various perspectives. So in this episode, I'm going to look at the story of Sergeant John Brimble, 73 Squadron at Castle Camps, who was shot down on the 14th of September 1940. Now, it's quite an interesting combat, actually, and I'm going to read this extract, which is from, you can see it, no you can't see it, volume 5 of the official history I've just finished of the Battle of Britain, for the Battle of Britain Memorial Trust and National Memorial to the Few. 8 volumes, 1 million words, an unprecedented narrative, to be fair. And this is from volume 5. Now it says, from 1500 hours onwards, RDF, that's radio direction finding, radar in other words, indicated strong enemy forces assembling over Calais. The first enemy force crossed the South Kent coast at 1530 hours, and by 1545 hours, 4 more came in between Dover and Ramsgate, whilst another 2 passed over Beachy Head. Just before 1600 hours, 2 of these formations have reached London, dropping bombs on Camberwell, Battersea Power Station, and a gasometer there, and the railway between Victoria and Clapham Junction was also damaged. So they've made it to the target, haven't they? At 1530 hours, 73 Squadron was scrambled from Castle Camps with orders to link up with Debden 17 Squadron and patrol North Weald at Angels 15, which is to say 15,000 feet. According to 17 Squadron, however, it patrolled Gravesend to Biggin Hill from 1530 to 1645 hours, but no enemy aircraft was seen. 73 Squadron, therefore, was alone over Tilbury, over the Thames estuary, when bounced by Me-109s of JG-77, and 4 Hurricanes were hit. Green Section, comprising Sergeants Robert Plenderleith, Herbert Webster and Geoffrey Garton, reported that their formation had been attacked and broken up by a section of Spitfires, diving on them at 16,000 feet near Tilbury. A Flying Officer James Smith, a Canadian, reported having seen a Hurricane shot down by a Spitfire south of Tilbury. There are no corresponding claims by Spitfire pilots, however, but Hurricanes were claimed in that area and at that time by Oberleutnants Hubert Metoek, Franz Hahn and Feldwebel Franz Barton, all of 2 Staffel JG-77, and 2 by Unteroffizier Rudolf Mixner of 3 Staffel JG-77, and a subsequent 73 Squadron ORB, that's the Operations Record Book, Squadron Diary, effectively, states that the Squadron Intelligence Officer sent in a report and group has called for a further report on the matter. It is possible that the Spitfires, which attacked green and blue sections, were Heinkel 111s, and actually they mean Heinkel 113s, which is the prototype that were reported throughout the Battle of Britain that never actually saw service. And it is to be hoped that investigation will prove this possibility to be correct. There is no doubt it wasn't Spitfires. They saw and were attacked by Me-109s of JG-77. Anyway, in this clash over Tilbury, Pilot Officer Roy Marchand's Hurricane was hit, returning to base with a bullet through his port main tank, another through the port aileron and main spar, and another clean through the top of the wireless mast. Flight Lieutenant Michael Baytar force landed at West Malling with a damaged radiator. Sergeant Alfred Marshall was shot down by a 109 and force landed at the Air Ministry Experimental Station Dover. And Sergeant Maurice Leng was also shot down, landing his very badly damaged Hurricane back at base. Fortunately, none of those pilots were injured. And as the Germans withdrew, the battle ebbed south, where 73 squadrons suffered more casualties. Hauptmann Dieter Hrabak and Oberleutnant Heinz Stegmann of Stab, that's the staff flight of 2 Gruppe JG54, claimed Hurricanes destroyed southeast of London. Over Tunbridge, 73's commanding officer, squadron leader Maurice Robinson, was shot down and bailed out, wounded. The surgeon at Kent and Sussex Hospital, sadly, later being unable to save the sight in his right eye. Sergeant John Brimble was also lost over Tunbridge and reported missing in action, which he would remain until 1980. And that's what we're going to talk about. So that's quite a combat, isn't it? 109's all over the place, and poor 73 squadron getting hit twice by 2 different ME-109 units at 2 different locations. But we've spoken in the other episodes, and it's quite strange because we did an introductory video to this. Episode 2, we started talking about some of the recoveries that were controversial and which started causing problems. And then we have the situation going forward with more recoveries and so on. And it's strange because I think episode 2 has got the most views so far. Episode 3 is still picking up views. But people, you really need to watch all of these to actually follow the chronology and understand it. So in the last episode, we saw that the MOD were getting mighty upset with these recoveries and the human remains that were being presented when aircraft were recovered, but there was no law in place to back up the Ministry of Defence guidelines for recovery groups. And although procedure dictated that a licence for a recovery was necessary, if you didn't have a licence, apart from the Ministry refusing to cooperate with you, there was no penalty in law. So people were just going to carry on. And that's really what happened with this. In May 1980, Steve Vizard, a very good friend of mine, a lot of time for Steve, Steve was then involved with his Tunbridge Air Museum and given a licence to excavate what was purported to be another 73 Squadron Hurricane, L2118, at Park House Farm, Chart Sutton in Kent. But when the dig went ahead, it was actually P2542, Sergeant Brimble's. And you've guessed it, Sergeant Brimble was recovered by Steve and friends and presented to the ministry. So, and actually it's a case really of certain remains of Sergeant Brimble were recovered, because there was actually some of his remains recovered during the Battle of Britain and buried in Bell Road Cemetery in Sittingbourne as unknown, alongside those of another pilot. And in 1998, when I was working on Missing Action, Resting in Peace, which remains the chronology really of all of this, which is what I'm using to take me up to 1998 with this series of videos. And in 1998, friends and I proved to the MOD and the Commonwealth War Grave Commission's satisfaction that those remains were of Sergeant Brimble, and the other remains were actually Flying Officer John Winchringham Cutts of Treble 2 Squadron, a Spitfire pilot from Hornchurch. So their names. So John Brimble has, they're not unique actually, but somewhat unusual scenario of having 2 separate graves. And he was buried as a result of Steve's recovery with full military honours at Brookwood on the 16th of October 1980. And to this day, Steve believes very strongly that he did the right thing, because had he not, Sergeant Brimble would remain missing. So people do feel very strongly about this. However, that recovery was perhaps badly timed, because only the previous week, the Missing No Known Grave documentary, where Andy Saunders and friends had recovered Flight Lieutenant Hugh Beresford, was broadcast and had picked up a lot of media interest, naturally, and so too did this. So the whole thing took off in the press with one headline reading, "Death Plane Dig Runs into Flak," and the RAF's stated position in the media was that it was upset and angry because a licence had been issued for a non-controversial aircraft, one that pilot had bailed out of, when they believed that the enthusiasts actually had good reason to believe that it was actually that of a missing pilot, and in this case John Brimble, as indeed it transpired to be. So as Steve admittedly said, it was a fait accompli, but they felt justified in what they did. So that then led to the Ministry of Defence revoking all existing permissions, recovery licences, and calling a meeting in London, which was held on the 7th of January 1981 and attended by numerous stakeholders and interested parties, organisations, individuals, and so on. And it sort of thrashed the whole thing around and explained, the ministry explained its position, and I think probably I quoted in full the Ministry of Defence press release in the book that came out the following day, not the book, the press release. And I'll just read this bit, which is just the summing up by the chairman. And he said that there were no easy answers. They had to face, they being the Ministry of Defence, a wide range of strongly held views. There were those who very sincerely felt that recovery of human remains should be undertaken. A lot of others felt equally strongly that aircraft wrecks should be a last resting place. The meeting had heard as many expressions of view opposed to recovery as those for it, and the associations present represented very many people. He therefore asked all aviation archaeologists to have respect for the ministry's policy based on the very sincerely held views of a great many people. So basically, what the MOD had decided already was a policy of non-disturbance, of letting sleeping dogs lie, effectively. Now, in this series of videos, and indeed with the recoveries we're talking about, we are primarily concerned with the Battle of Britain, where there is a limited number of such casualties. But of course, the Ministry of Defence's perspective is for the whole of time, really, where all wars that Britain has fought in and has suffered casualties. So you can sort of understand it from the Ministry's perspective that they don't want to open the floodgates. However, there are those who believe that these cases should be considered on a case-by-case basis. And I'll give you an example of that. My great-grandfather, Private Herbert Smith of the 4th Worcestershire Regiment, missing in action in Gallipoli in July 1915. Now, I think I'm right in saying there's something like 20,000 names on the Helles Memorial at Gallipoli commemorating the missing, and there are 10,000 unknown graves, unidentified graves on Gallipoli. So it will clearly be completely ridiculous for me to say, right, well, I want all 10,000 graves opened up and a DNA test done to see if any of those is my great-granddad. Well, that would obviously be absurd, wouldn't it? Completely unreasonable. But in these cases where there is such evidence that points to there being human remains and a missing pilot, then maybe that needs looking at. However, there are pitfalls connected with that, which we're going to talk about in the next episode, because it doesn't matter how much information you have, how much circumstantial or even documentary evidence can point to a crash site being that of a particular airman and aircraft, you cannot even then be sure until you've actually done the recovery. And in the next instalment of The Missing Few, we're going to be talking about the recoveries of pilot officers Colin Francis and John Ramsey, and particularly Flying Officer Michael Dalton, which ended up being a controversial one for reasons I'll explain and for what I was just talking about. And also Unteroffizier Fritz Buchner, because it doesn't just concern RAF pilots and aircrew. So we'll talk about that next. Episode 6, we're going to talk about the recoveries between Fritz Buchner and the Protection of Military Remains Act, POMRA as it's called, coming in 1986, which changed everything, because that gave the MOD rules, regulations, guidelines, the weight of law, and sanctions for those who contravene the law. So we're going to look at that. In episode 7, I'm going to look in detail at POMRA, which I wrote up all those years ago in the book, and nothing's changed so far as the actual statute is concerned. But we'll have a look at that. And then episodes 8 and 9, we're going to have a look at the recovery attempts and situation between the advent of POMRA and today. And then in episode 10, we may well have a very, very special guest joining us, which I'm working on at the moment. I think it's very important that we get people in to give their perspective. And there may even be an episode 11, because if I do get said special guest from the authorities in episode 10, I think we could follow that up with a final discussion. So there we are, the missing few, and today talking about Sergeant John Brimble, 73 Squadron, shot down, missing in action, 14th of September 1940. And it really is, isn't it, a case of lest we forget. So we won't forget. There we are. So we'll get back to recording some more of these. If you enjoy listening, you enjoy watching, I hope you're learning something, join the community. You can subscribe and watch our videos for free and our podcasts, and join the community, join the discussion. Any comments, please put them below, and I will see you very soon. Thanks for watching.